The rustle of cotton skirts against the weathered fence post caught Levi Morgan's attention before he even turned his head. He'd been watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in streaks of amber and purple, his thoughts as vast and lonely as the plains stretching before him. It was 1878, and at 32 years old, he'd seen enough of life to know that beauty often came paired with sorrow. The ranch had been quiet since his father's passing last winter, leaving him sole owner of the struggling Morgan homestead. He didn't turn right away when she settled beside him on the fence rail. Something about the moment felt fragile, like disturbing a wild deer that had wandered too close. The fence creaked beneath their combined weight, and the scent of lavender drifted toward him on the evening breeze. It wasn't a smell common to these parts, something brought from elsewhere. Just like her hands, he noticed from the corner of his eye, were pale and unblemished by the harsh prairie sun. Not a local woman, then. Levi allowed himself to look at her directly for the first time. She sat with perfect posture despite the uncomfortable perch, her face tilted toward the dying sun. A stray curl had escaped her bonnet, dancing against her cheek in the gentle wind. Her profile was strong but delicate, with a determined set to her jaw that spoke of someone who knew her own mind. "Evening," Levi said finally, his voice rough from disuse. He cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how long it had been since he'd spoken to anyone besides his ranch hands or his horse. She turned to him then, and something in Levi's chest shifted like tectonic plates beneath the earth. Her eyes were a startling shade of green, bright against her sun-kissed skin. She nodded in acknowledgement but said nothing. Levi found himself uncharacteristically eager to fill the silence. "Pretty sunset." The woman's lips curved in a slight smile, but she remained silent, turning her attention back to the horizon. Levi couldn't help but wonder what had brought her to this remote corner of the territory, and more curiously, to this particular fence line that marked the boundary of his property. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared completely, leaving behind a canvas of stars. Levi had always appreciated the quiet, had sought it out in fact, but this shared silence felt different. It felt like a conversation without words, a mutual appreciation of the moment. When she finally stood to leave, Levi felt an unfamiliar pang of disappointment. She brushed down her skirts and gave him one last look, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Good night," he offered, tipping his hat. She nodded again, and then she was gone, walking down the path toward town with purposeful strides. Levi remained on the fence long after she'd disappeared from sight, contemplating the strange encounter. He couldn't explain, even to himself, why his heart felt lighter than it had in years. All she'd done was sit beside him on a fence rail, watching the sun set over his struggling ranch. Yet Levi Morgan had the unsettling feeling that something fundamental had changed in his world. The following morning, Levi woke before dawn as usual. The encounter with the mysterious woman felt dreamlike in the cold light of day, but the memory of her silent presence lingered as he went about his chores. He fed the horses, checked on a pregnant mare, and discussed the day's work with his foreman, Jacob. "We need to move the herd to the north pasture today," Jacob said, chewing on a piece of straw. "That grass in the south field is nearly gone," Levi nodded, his mind only half on the conversation. "I'll ride out with you after breakfast. You all right, boss?" Jacob asked, his weathered face creased with concern. "You seem a bit distracted." "I'm fine," Levi said quickly. "Just thinking about the water situation. We'll need to dig another well before summer if this dry spell continues." Jacob seemed satisfied with the explanation, but as they walked back to the main house, Levi found himself glancing toward the fence line where he'd met the woman. In the daylight, it looked ordinary, just a weathered wooden boundary marking the edge of his property. Nothing to suggest it had been the site of an encounter that had left him so unsettled. After a simple breakfast of biscuits and coffee, Levi saddled his bay gelding, Thunder, and rode out with Jacob and two other hands to move the cattle. The work was hard and dirty, but familiar. The physical exertion helped clear his mind, and by midday, Levi had almost convinced himself that the silent woman had been nothing special, just a passing traveler who'd stopped to rest. It wasn't until late afternoon, as he rode back toward the ranch house, that he saw her again. She was at the same spot on the fence, her back straight and her face turned toward the mountains. This time, she wore a blue dress, simple but well-made, and her hair was partly visible beneath her bonnet, a rich chestnut brown that caught the sunlight. Levi slowed Thunder to a walk, then a halt. He should continue to the house. There was paperwork waiting, accounts to be settled, letters to write. Yet he found himself dismounting instead, tying Thunder to a nearby post and walking toward the fence with his hat in his hands. "Afternoon," he said as he approached, trying to sound casual. "You're back." She turned to him, those remarkable green eyes studying his face. Again, she offered a small smile but no words. Levi noticed a book in her lap, bound in worn leather. "Do you mind if I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the space beside her on the fence rail. She shook her head and moved slightly to make room for him. Levi settled beside her, careful to leave a respectable distance between them. Up close, he could see that her eyes weren't simply green, they were flecked with gold, like sunlight through forest leaves. "I'm Levi Morgan," he said, offering his name like a gift. "This is my ranch you're sitting on the edge of." She nodded, and for a moment Levi thought she might speak, but instead she opened her book and turned it toward him. On the page was a beautifully rendered sketch of the landscape before them, the rolling hills, the distant mountains, even the weathered fence post. At the bottom, in careful script, was a name, Zara Adams. "Zara," Levi said, testing the name on his tongue. "That's a beautiful name." "And you're quite the artist." She inclined her head in acknowledgement, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "You're new to these parts," Levi continued. It wasn't a question. Zara nodded, then turned to a fresh page in her book. She wrote quickly, her handwriting neat and precise. "I arrived last week, staying with my aunt in town." "I see," Levi said, understanding dawning. "You don't speak." She met his eyes directly then, and Levi saw a flash of something, defiance, perhaps, or the expectation of pity. He offered neither. "Well, Miss Adams," he said instead, "you found the best spot for watching sunsets in the whole territory. I'd be honored to share it with you any time." The tension in her shoulders eased, and she smiled, a real smile this time, one that transformed her face and made Levi's heart stumble in his chest. She wrote again, "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Morgan." "Levi," he corrected gently. "Mr. Morgan was my father." "Levi," she wrote, and even seeing his name in her handwriting felt strangely intimate. They sat together until the sun began to set, not speaking but occasionally exchanging notes. Levi learned that Zara had come from Boston to stay with her aunt indefinitely. She didn't explain why she couldn't speak, and Levi didn't ask. Some stories, he knew, had to be offered freely, not pried loose. As darkness fell, she closed her book and stood to leave. "Will you come tomorrow?" Levi asked, surprising himself with the eagerness in his voice. Zara hesitated, then nodded once before walking away, her blue dress swaying with each step. Levi watched her go, Thunder nickering impatiently behind him. He should have been focused on his ranch, on the 1,000 tasks awaiting his attention. Instead, all he could think about was seeing Zara Adams again. The next day passed in a blur of anticipation. Levi found himself checking the position of the sun throughout the afternoon, calculating how long until their meeting. It was foolish, he knew. He had only met the woman twice, and she hadn't spoken a word to him. Yet something about her silent presence, the way she communicated through gestures and written words, had captivated him. True to her word, Zara returned to the fence at sunset. This time she had brought a small basket covered with a checkered cloth. Levi, who had been waiting for nearly an hour, stood as she approached. "Miss Adams," he greeted her, tipping his hat. "You're right on time." She smiled and set the basket on the fence between them. When she uncovered it, Levi saw freshly baked biscuits, a small jar of honey, and 2 apples. "You brought dinner," he said, touched by the gesture. Zara opened her book and wrote, "A small thank you for sharing your sunset view." They ate together as the sky turned from blue to orange to purple. Levi told her about the ranch, about his father who had claimed this land when Montana was still wild territory, about his hopes to expand the herd and maybe plant some crops next year. Zara listened attentively, occasionally writing questions or observations. What about your family? Levi asked eventually. Besides your aunt, I mean. Zara's expression clouded. She wrote slowly. My parents died 3 years ago, influenza. I have no siblings. I'm sorry, Levi said softly. It's just me too, since Pa passed last winter. She reached out then and placed her hand briefly on his arm, a gesture of shared understanding that conveyed more than words could have. When she withdrew, Levi found himself missing her touch. As the weeks passed, their evening meetings became a ritual. Sometimes they would sit in companionable silence, Zara sketching in her book while Levi whittled or simply watched the changing sky. Other times, they would exchange notes, sharing stories and thoughts. Levi found himself looking forward to these quiet evenings more than anything else in his day. He learned that Zara had been a teacher in Boston before coming west. She loved poetry and could recite dozens of poems from memory, though now she could only write them down. Her favorite color was blue, like the Montana sky. She was 26 years old and had never been married. In turn, he told her about his dreams for the ranch, about the books he read during the long winter nights, about his mother who had died when he was just a boy. He found himself sharing thoughts he had never voiced to anyone, not even his father. One evening in late June, Levi arrived at the fence to find Zara already there, her face troubled. She had her book open, a message already written. I must speak with you about something important. Levi felt a chill despite the summer warmth. What is it? My aunt has received a letter from my uncle in San Francisco. He wants me to come live with him and his family. Levi's heart sank. When would you leave? Next month, when the stage comes through. I see. Levi tried to keep his voice steady. And do you want to go? Zara hesitated, then wrote, I don't know, I have no prospects here, no way to support myself. You could teach, Levi suggested. The town's growing, they'll need a school teacher soon. She shook her head and wrote, who would hire a teacher who cannot speak? The question hung between them, unanswerable. Levi wanted to protest, to insist that her silence didn't define her abilities, but he knew the world was rarely so understanding. Zara, he said finally, her name soft on his lips. These past weeks have been the happiest I've known in a long time. She looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I know we haven't known each other long, Levi continued, gathering his courage. And I know this is sudden, but I don't want you to leave. I want you to stay here with me. Zara's eyes widened and she quickly wrote, What are you saying, Levi? I'm saying that I care for you, Zara Adams, more than I thought possible. Levi took a deep breath. I'm asking if you might consider becoming my wife. The silence that followed was the heaviest they had shared. Zara stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then she closed her book, stood up, and walked away without a backward glance. Levi remained on the fence, watching her go with a sinking heart. He had moved too quickly, said too much. Now he had frightened her away, perhaps forever. The next evening, Levi went to the fence at sunset out of habit, though he had little hope that Zara would appear. He was surprised and relieved when he saw her approaching, her book clutched tightly to her chest. She sat beside him without greeting and immediately opened to a page filled with her neat handwriting. I apologize for leaving so abruptly yesterday. Your proposal caught me by surprise. I needed time to think. I understand, Levi said. I spoke too hastily. I shouldn't have. She placed a finger against his lips, silencing him. Then she turned to a new page in her book. The message there made Levi's heart stop. I will marry you, Levi Morgan. Not because I need a place to stay, but because in these quiet evenings together, I've found something I thought was lost to me forever. Hope. Levi read the words twice, scarcely believing what he was seeing. You will, he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Zara nodded, her smile radiant. Levi took her hand in his, marveling at how perfectly it fit within his calloused palm. I promise you won't regret it, he said. I'll spend every day trying to make you happy. She squeezed his hand and wrote, I know you will, and I will do the same for you. As the sunset painted the sky in celebratory colors, Levi felt a sense of rightness settle over him. This woman, who had never spoken a word to him, had somehow said everything his lonely heart needed to hear. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in town. Zara wore a simple white dress that her aunt had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Levi, in his best suit, could scarcely take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle toward him. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When it came time for Zara to speak her vows, the pastor had arranged for her to write them beforehand, and he read them aloud for the congregation. Levi, however, asked if he might read them himself. "I, Zara Adams, take you, Levi Morgan, to be my husband," he read, his voice clear and strong. "I promise to love you faithfully, in silence and in joy, in hardship and in ease, as long as we both shall live. Though I cannot speak the words aloud, I write them on my heart. I love you, and I always will." There wasn't a dry eye in the church as Levi finished reading. He looked up to find Zara watching him, tears streaming down her face. She mouthed the words "thank you," and Levi had never felt so understood in all his life. After the ceremony, there was a small celebration at Zara's aunt's house. The townspeople had taken to Zara despite her silence, or perhaps because of it. She had a way of listening that made people feel truly heard, a rare quality in a world where most were simply waiting for their turn to speak. As the evening wore on, Levi found a moment alone with his new wife in the garden. "Happy?" he asked, taking her hands in his. Zara nodded emphatically, her eyes shining. "I've been thinking," Levi said. "The ranch house is a bit rough right now. I never bothered to fix it up much after Pa died. But I thought maybe we could work on it together, make it a proper home." Zara squeezed his hands and nodded again, her smile all the answer he needed. That night, as they rode back to the ranch that was now their home, Levi felt a sense of peace wash over him. The house was indeed rough, a simple two-room cabin with basic furnishings, but Zara didn't seem to mind. She walked through each room with interest, running her hands over the worn wooden table, examining the bookshelf with its small collection of volumes, testing the mattress on the bed that would now be theirs. When she had finished her inspection, she took out her book and wrote, "It's perfect." "It's ours." Levi released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "We'll make it better," he promised. "A bit at a time," she wrote again. "It doesn't matter what it looks like, it matters who's in it." Levi pulled her into his arms then, overwhelmed by the simple wisdom of her words. "How did I get so lucky?" he murmured against her hair. Zara leaned back to look at him, her expression serious. She pointed to herself, then to him, then to the fence visible through the window. "The fence," Levi said, understanding, "where we met." She nodded, then wrote, "Some things are meant to be." Their first weeks of marriage were a time of adjustment and discovery. Levi had lived alone for so long that he had to relearn the rhythms of sharing a space with another person. Zara, for her part, had to adapt to ranch life, the early mornings, the physical work, the isolation, but they found their way together. Zara proved to be a quick learner and an eager helper. She took over the kitchen garden, expanding it with herbs and vegetables. She learned to make cheese from the milk of their 2 dairy cows. She even helped with the horses, showing a natural affinity for the animals that impressed Levi's ranch hands. For his part, Levi worked harder than ever, determined to make the ranch prosper for their future. He repaired the roof that had leaked for years, built new shelves in the kitchen, and started work on an addition to the house, a sitting room where Zara could read and sketch during the long winter months ahead. They still met at the fence sometimes, at sunset. It was their place, the spot where their story had begun. They would sit side by side, sometimes talking, Levi speaking, Zara writing, sometimes simply existing together in the peaceful quiet of the evening. One such evening in late summer, as they watched the sun sink below the mountains, Levi noticed that Zara seemed unusually thoughtful. "What's on your mind?" he asked, nudging her gently with his shoulder. She hesitated, then opened her book and wrote, "I want to tell you why I don't speak." Levi's heart quickened. In all their time together, she had never offered this information, and he had never asked. "Only if you want to," he said carefully. Zara nodded and began to write. Her pencil moved swiftly across the page, filling it with words. When she finished, she handed the book to Levi. "I could speak once," he read. "Until I was 23. I was teaching at a school in Boston when a fire broke out. I helped get the children out, but I inhaled too much smoke. The doctors said the damage to my throat was severe. At first they thought my voice would return with time. It didn't. After a year of treatments and disappointments, I accepted that my silence was permanent. My parents had died the year before, and without my teaching position, I had nothing left in Boston, so I came west to stay with my aunt. I thought perhaps I could start again where no one knew me before, where my silence wouldn't be compared to the voice I once had. Levi read the words twice, his heart aching for the trauma she had endured. "You saved children from a fire," he said finally. "You're a hero, Zara." She shook her head, dismissing the praise, and took the book back to write more. "I'm telling you this because I want you to know that I made my peace with silence long ago. I don't want you to feel sorry for me or to keep hoping my voice will return someday. This is who I am now." "Zara," Levi said, taking her hands in his, "I fell in love with you exactly as you are. Your silence is part of you, but it doesn't define you, not to me." She leaned forward and kissed him then, a gesture that conveyed everything words could not. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Levi thought about what Zara had shared. Her resilience amazed him to have lost so much and still approach life with such grace and optimism. He promised himself again that he would do everything in his power to give her the happy life she deserved. The following day, Levi rode into town to collect supplies and mail. Among the letters was one from a cattle buyer in Helena offering a good price for steers. It was an opportunity they couldn't afford to miss, but it would mean a week-long journey. When he told Zara about the trip that evening, she immediately wrote, "You should go. The ranch needs the money." "I don't like leaving you alone," Levi admitted, "especially not for so long." "I'll be fine," she wrote. "Jacob and the others will be here, and I'm stronger than I look." Levi laughed. "That I know all too well, Mrs. Morgan." He had seen her split logs and muck out stalls without complaint. "Still, a week is a long time." "The sooner you go, the sooner you'll be back," she wrote, practical as always, so it was decided. Levi would leave in 2 days, taking 20 head of cattle to Helena with Jacob and 2 other hands. Zara spent the time before his departure preparing food for his journey and helping him select the best steers for sale. The morning of his departure arrived all too quickly. Levi held Zara close, reluctant to let go. "I'll be back before you know it," he promised, "and we'll have money for that new cook stove you've been wanting." Zara smiled and stood on tiptoe to kiss him. She had written a note the night before, which she now pressed into his hand. "Safe journey, my love. The house will be empty without you, but my heart goes with you wherever you ride. Come back to me soon." Levi tucked the note into his shirt pocket close to his heart. "I will," he vowed. Then he mounted Thunder and rode out with the men and cattle, looking back to see Zara waving from the porch until a bend in the trail took her from view. The journey to Helena was uneventful but tiring. The cattle moved slowly, and the men had to be constantly vigilant for strays or signs of trouble. They camped under the stars each night, taking turns keeping watch. In Helena, the cattle sale went even better than expected. The buyer was impressed with the quality of the steers and offered a premium price. Levi also took the opportunity to purchase supplies that were hard to come by in their small town tools: fabric for Zara, seeds for next year's garden, and yes, the new cook stove he had promised. By the time they started for home, Levi was more than ready to see his wife again. The separation had been harder than he'd anticipated. He missed her quiet presence, the way she communicated so much with just her eyes and gestures, the feel of her hand in his as they sat on the porch in the evening. They made good time on the return journey, unencumbered by cattle. As they approached the ranch on the 7th day, Levi rode ahead, eager to surprise Zara. It was late afternoon, approaching the time when they would normally meet at the fence. On impulse, he directed Thunder toward their special spot. And there she was, sitting on the fence rail, her face turned toward the sun. She was wearing the blue dress he particularly loved, and her hair was loose around her shoulders, caught by the breeze. The sight of her made Levi's heart skip a beat. He dismounted quietly and approached on foot. Zara must have sensed his presence, for she turned before he spoke. The joy that transformed her face at the sight of him was everything Levi had hoped for. She leapt from the fence and ran to him, throwing herself into his arms with such force that he staggered back a step. "I missed you too," he laughed, lifting her off her feet in an embrace. "So much." That night, after Levi had shown her the cookstove and other purchases, they sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge. Zara had her book open on her lap, but she wasn't writing. Instead, she was leaning against Levi's shoulder, content in the moment. "I've been thinking," Levi said after a while, "about the future." Zara looked up at him questioningly. "The cattle sale went better than I expected. We have some money saved now, enough to make real improvements to the ranch." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I was thinking we might build a proper house, something bigger with more rooms." Zara sat up straighter, her interest piqued. She wrote, "More rooms, what for?" Levi felt a flush creep up his neck. "Well, I thought maybe for children someday, if you wanted." Zara's expression softened. She wrote slowly, deliberately, "I would like that very much, but Levi, are you sure? Children are noisy, demanding, they need to be spoken to." "And they will be," Levi said firmly, "by both of us in our own ways. You have so much to teach a child, Zara. Your art, your love of books, your kindness. Any child would be blessed to have you as a mother." Tears welled in Zara's eyes. She wrote, "You always know exactly what to say to me." "That's because I love you," Levi said simply. "More every day." As autumn turned to winter, Levi and Zara settled into the rhythms of married life on the ranch. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the land in white and keeping them close to home. They spent the long evenings reading by the fire, Levi often reading aloud from Zara's favorite books while she sketched or mended. They began planning the new house, drawing rough designs on paper and discussing where each room should be. Zara wanted large windows to capture the light and view. Levi insisted on a solid stone fireplace that would last generations. They agreed on a wide porch wrapping around the front and side where they could sit and watch the sunsets together. Winter deepened, and Christmas approached. It would be their first as husband and wife, and they both wanted it to be special. Levi rode into town through the snow to purchase gifts, while Zara worked secretly on presents of her own, a new shirt she had sewn for Levi, and a book of her sketches documenting their life together. On Christmas Eve, they decorated a small pine tree that Levi had cut from their land. They hung simple ornaments, pine cones dipped in wax, paper stars, a few glass baubles that had belonged to Levi's mother. When they finished, they stepped back to admire their work. "It's perfect," Levi said, his arm around Zara's waist. She nodded, then pointed to the top of the tree, which was bare. "You're right, we need a star," Levi agreed. "I forgot to get one in town." Zara held up a finger, asking him to wait, and disappeared into the bedroom. She returned with something wrapped in tissue paper. When she unwrapped it, Levi saw a star cut from tin, carefully polished until it shone like silver. "Did you make this?" he asked, amazed. Zara nodded, a shy smile playing on her lips. "It's beautiful," Levi said, taking it from her carefully. "Will you do the honors?" Together, they placed the star atop the tree. As they stood back to admire it, Levi felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what he had always wanted without knowing it, a home filled with love, a partner to share his life with, traditions they were building together. That night, as they lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside, Zara placed Levi's hand on her stomach and looked at him meaningfully. "Zara," he whispered, hardly daring to hope. "Are you?" She nodded, her eyes shining in the darkness. "A baby. We're having a baby." Another nod, more emphatic this time. Levi pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed with joy. "When? How long have you known?" She held up 3 fingers, then pointed to the window where moonlight illuminated the falling snow. 3 months. The baby will come in summer." Zara nodded again, then reached for her book on the bedside table. She wrote, "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," Levi said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm overjoyed, Zara, absolutely overjoyed." She curled against him, her hand still holding his against her stomach where their child grew. Levi marveled at the miracle of it, this new life created from their love, this family they were building together. As winter slowly gave way to spring, Zara's condition became more noticeable. Her slender frame now carried a distinct roundness that Levi found endlessly fascinating. He would often place his hand on her growing belly, hoping to feel the baby move. Work on the new house began as soon as the ground thawed. Levi hired additional men from town to help with the construction, determined to have it finished before the baby arrived. The foundation was laid, then the frame raised. Walls went up, then a roof. Windows were installed, letting light flood into the spaces that would soon be rooms. Zara visited the construction site daily, her book filled with notes and suggestions. The builders quickly learned to respect her opinions. She had an eye for detail and proportion that Levi lacked. Under her guidance, the house took shape as a harmonious whole rather than a collection of rooms. One evening in late spring, as they sat on their usual fence watching the sunset, Levi noticed Zara wince and place a hand on her side. "The baby?" he asked, immediately concerned. She nodded, then wrote, "Just kicking, very active today." Levi placed his hand beside hers and was rewarded with a definite thump against his palm. "Strong," he said with a grin, "like mother and father." Zara smiled, but Levi noticed a shadow in her eyes. She wrote, "I've been thinking about the baby, about when it cries at night. I won't be able to sing lullabies." "No," Levi agreed gently, "but you'll be able to rock our child, to hold and comfort, and I can sing, though I warn you, it's not a pretty sound." This coaxed a genuine smile from Zara, but she wrote again, "What if something happens to you? How will I call for help if the baby is sick or hurt?" Levi understood her fear. Living on a remote ranch was challenging enough. Doing so without the ability to call out in an emergency added another layer of vulnerability. "We'll work something out," he promised. "A bell system, perhaps, or signals with the lantern. And we won't be alone, there's always someone at the bunkhouse." Zara nodded, accepting his reassurances, but Levi could see she was still worried. He made a mental note to speak with Jacob about ensuring someone was always within signal distance of the house, especially after the baby came. As summer approached, the new house neared completion. They moved in 2 weeks before Zara's expected due date, wanting time to settle before the baby arrived. The house was everything they had planned, spacious but cozy, with plenty of room for their growing family. The nursery adjoined their bedroom, painted a soft yellow with curtains Zara had sewn herself. The baby, however, had plans of its own. Just 3 days after they moved in, Zara woke Levi in the middle of the night, her face contorted in pain. Her labor had begun, a week earlier than expected. Levi sent one of the ranch hands galloping for the midwife in town, while he helped Zara walk slowly around the room, supporting her through each contraction. By the time the midwife arrived, the contractions were coming fast and strong. "First babies usually take their time," the midwife said after examining Zara, "but this little one seems in a hurry to meet the world." She was right. After just 6 hours of labor, Zara gave birth to a healthy baby girl with a tuft of dark hair and eyes that, when briefly opened, appeared to be the same remarkable green as her mother's. "She's perfect," Levi whispered, holding his daughter for the first time. "Absolutely perfect." Zara, exhausted but radiant, reached for her book and wrote with shaky hands. "What shall we name her?" They had discussed names during the long winter evenings but had never definitively decided. Now, looking at his daughter's tiny face, Levi knew. "What about Hope?" he suggested. "Because that's what she represents for us both." Zara's eyes filled with tears as she nodded, then wrote, "Hope Morgan, it's beautiful." "Like her mother," Levi said, placing the baby in Zara's arms. As he watched his wife cradle their daughter, Levi felt a love so profound it was almost painful. This was his family, the woman who had captured his heart without speaking a word, and the daughter who represented their shared future. In the days that followed, they adjusted to life with a newborn. Hope proved to be a good-natured baby, crying only when hungry or uncomfortable. Zara took to motherhood naturally, her quiet patience perfect for the long hours of infant care. Levi helped as much as he could, balancing ranch work with family responsibilities. True to his word, he sang to Hope at night old cowboy songs and lullabies he remembered from his own childhood. His voice was indeed rough, but the baby didn't seem to mind. She would gaze up at him with those green eyes, sometimes cooing along in her own baby language. Zara found her own ways to communicate with their daughter. She would tap rhythms on Hope's tiny hand or against her back while rocking her. She made up games with fingers and facial expressions that soon had the baby giggling. And she read to her, or rather, she would sit with Hope in her lap while Levi read aloud, turning the pages and pointing to pictures. As Hope grew from newborn to infant to toddler, their family life found its rhythm. The ranch prospered under Levi's management, allowing them to hire more hands and expand their herd. The new house became a true home, filled with the evidence of their shared life, Zara's sketches on the walls, books on every surface, Hope's toys scattered across the floor. By the time Hope was 2, she was a lively, curious child with her mother's artistic bent and her father's stubborn determination. She had also developed a unique way of communicating with Zara, a blend of gestures and expressions that mother and daughter both understood instinctively. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Hope chase fireflies in the yard, Levi marveled at how much his life had changed in just a few years. "Do you ever think about that first evening," he asked Zara, "when you came and sat beside me on the fence?" She nodded, smiling at the memory, and wrote in her ever-present book, "I was so nervous. I had seen you there several evenings before but hadn't worked up the courage to approach. You'd been watching me," Levi asked, surprised. "I had no idea." "From my aunt's back window," she wrote. The fence was visible from there with Pa's old spyglass. Levi laughed. "So you were spying on me, and here I thought our meeting was chance." Zara shook her head, her expression turning serious as she wrote, "Not chance, I chose you, Levi Morgan. Before I ever sat on that fence, I had watched you for days, how you treated your horse, how you spoke to your men, how you sat alone with your thoughts. I saw a good man, a kind man, a man I wanted to know." Levi was touched beyond words. "And here I thought I was the one doing the choosing," he said softly, "that I fell in love with you first." Zara's smile was radiant as she wrote, "Perhaps we chose each other at the same moment without words." Hope came running up then, a firefly cupped gently in her small hands. "Look, Papa." "Look, Mama," she exclaimed, opening her fingers just enough to reveal the insect's glow. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Levi said. "Like a little star," Zara nodded in agreement, stroking her daughter's hair. "Can I keep it?" Hope asked. "Better to let it go," Levi advised. "It needs to be free to find its family." Hope considered this, then nodded solemnly. "Okay." She opened her hands, and the firefly rose into the air, its light blinking as it flew away. "Bye-bye, firefly," she called after it. Then, turning to her mother, she signed goodbye with her hand, one of the gestures Zara had taught her. As Hope ran off to chase more fireflies, Levi reached for Zara's hand. "You've given me so much," he said. "A family, a purpose, a love I never thought I'd find." Zara squeezed his hand and leaned her head against his shoulder, her silent presence more eloquent than any words could be. The years passed, marked by the seasons and Hope's growth. By the time she was 5, she was fluent in the sign language that Zara had learned from books ordered from back east. The whole family used it now, along with spoken words, creating a rich tapestry of communication that was uniquely their own. Hope started school in town, riding in with Levi or one of the hands each morning and back in the afternoon. She thrived in the classroom, her natural curiosity and intelligence making her a favorite with the teacher, despite her occasional tendency to sign instead of speak. When Hope was 6, Zara discovered she was expecting their second child. The news brought joy to the whole family, especially Hope, who was thrilled at the prospect of becoming a big sister. "Will the baby know how to sign?" she asked one evening as they sat at dinner. "Not at first," Levi explained. "Babies have to learn everything: how to eat, how to walk, how to talk or sign. You'll be able to help teach this baby just like Mama and I taught you." Hope nodded seriously, accepting the responsibility. "I'll be a good teacher," she promised. The second pregnancy was harder on Zara than the first. She tired easily and suffered from dizzy spells that worried Levi. The doctor from town called in to examine her, prescribed rest, and recommended she stay close to home for the duration. Zara chafed at the restrictions but followed the doctor's orders for the sake of the baby. She spent her days sketching, reading, and supervising Hope's increasingly complex art projects. Levi took over more of the household duties, coming in from the ranch earlier each day to be with his family. In the spring, 2 months before the baby was due, a letter arrived from San Francisco. It was from Zara's uncle, whom they hadn't heard from in years. He wrote that his wife had died and he was considering moving back east. Before he did, he wanted to visit Zara and meet her family. "What do you think?" Levi asked after reading the letter aloud. "Should we invite him to stay with us?" Zara nodded, then wrote, "He's my only family besides you and Hope, and the baby should know its great uncle." So an invitation was sent, and 2 weeks later, a carriage arrived bearing Uncle William Adams, a distinguished-looking gentleman in his 60s with the same green eyes as Zara and Hope. "My dear girl," he said, embracing Zara warmly. "Look at you married, a mother and another on the way. Your parents would be so proud." He had brought gifts books for Hope, a fine shawl for Zara, and a bottle of good whiskey for Levi. Over dinner, he regaled them with stories of San Francisco and asked numerous questions about the ranch and their life in Montana. Later, when Hope had been put to bed, William turned to more serious matters. "I've been corresponding with a doctor in Vienna," he told them. "He's had some success treating conditions like yours, Zara." Zara stiffened, and Levi reached for her hand. "What kind of treatment?" he asked cautiously. "A surgical procedure," William explained, "to repair damaged vocal cords. It's still experimental, but the results have been promising in several cases." Zara shook her head firmly and wrote, "I made my peace with silence long ago. I have no desire to undergo an experimental surgery." "But think of the possibilities," William urged, "to speak to your daughter, to your husband, to sing to your new baby." Levi felt Zara's hand tighten in his. "I think what Zara is trying to say," he said carefully, "is that she doesn't need to speak to communicate with us. We understand each other just fine." William looked from one to the other, then sighed. "Of course, I didn't mean to presume. It's just that when your aunt wrote about your family, about little Hope who's learning sign language alongside her words, I thought perhaps. Well, never mind. It was merely a suggestion." The subject was dropped, but later that night, as they prepared for bed, Levi could tell it was still on Zara's mind. "Are you all right?" he asked, sitting beside her on the edge of the bed. She nodded, then wrote, "Would you want me to try the surgery?" "If there was a chance I could speak again," Levi considered the question carefully. "I want whatever makes you happy," he said finally. "If you want to try, I'll support you completely, but if you don't, that's fine too. I fell in love with you exactly as you are, Zara. Your silence has never been a barrier between us." She smiled at that, visibly relieved, and wrote, "That's how I feel too. I don't need my voice to be complete. I have everything I need right here." Uncle William stayed for a week, becoming fast friends with Hope and developing a genuine appreciation for the ranch and the life Levi and Zara had built. By the time he left, he had a standing invitation to return anytime and a promise from Hope to write to him regularly. Summer arrived, bringing with it the birth of their second child, a son they named William Levi Morgan, in honor of Zara's uncle and his father. Will, as they called him, was a robust baby with Levi's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair that stood straight up no matter how it was combed. Hope took to her role as big sister with enthusiasm, helping Zara with the baby and teaching Will sign language by signing at him constantly. Despite Levi's gentle reminders that the baby was too young to understand, as their family grew, so did the ranch. Levi purchased additional land, expanding their holdings and increasing their herd. They hired more hands, built a larger barn, and added a schoolroom to the house where Hope could study during bad weather and where, Zara hoped, both children would develop a love of learning. Life settled into new patterns, busy but fulfilling. Levi and Zara still made time for themselves, though still met occasionally at their fence at sunset, a tradition they maintained through the years as a reminder of where their story began. On one such evening, as they sat watching the sky turn gold and purple, Hope found them. At 10 years old, she was tall for her age, with Zara's artistic talent and Levi's outgoing nature. "There you are," she said, climbing up to join them on the fence rail. "Will's asleep and Mrs. Johnson is knitting by the fire. What are you doing out here?" "Remembering," Levi said, smiling at his daughter. This is where I met your mother, you know. I know, Hope said, rolling her eyes good-naturedly. You've told me 100 times. Mama sat down beside you on the fence, and you fell in love with her before she even spoke a word. Zara laughed silently, her shoulders shaking with mirth. Well, it's true, Levi said, unrepentant. Best day of my life, that was, better than the day I was born. Hope challenged, her green eyes twinkling. Tied for first place, Levi amended, putting an arm around her. Along with the day Will was born, Hope nodded, satisfied with this answer. Mama, she said, turning to Zara. Will and I were talking. Will's 4 months old, Levi interrupted. He wasn't talking. I was talking, he was listening, Hope clarified with the patience of an older sister used to explaining things to less perceptive adults. Anyway, we were thinking it would be nice to have a dog, a big one that could help with the cattle and sleep at the foot of my bed. Zara raised an eyebrow and signed, Were you now? And does Will have any preferences about the breed? Hope grinned, recognizing she was being teased. He's leaving that up to me, but I was thinking a collie would be nice, or maybe a shepherd. We'll think about it, Levi said, exchanging a glance with Zara. They had, in fact, already discussed getting a dog, but it was amusing to see Hope's campaign. As the sun disappeared completely and the first stars appeared, the three of them made their way back to the house. Will was still sleeping soundly in his cradle, his tiny fist curled against his cheek. Mrs. Johnson, the widow from town who helped with the children and the house, was indeed knitting by the fire. Everything quiet, Levi asked her. Peaceful as can be, she confirmed, gathering her knitting. I'll be heading home now, if that's all right. Jacob will drive you, Levi said, referring to his foreman who had been with them since the beginning. Now in his 50s, Jacob was still strong as an ox but had developed a soft spot for Mrs. Johnson. That was the subject of good-natured teasing among the ranch hands. After the children were settled for the night, Levi and Zara sat together on the porch swing, enjoying the cool evening air. The ranch was quiet, the only sounds the distant lowing of cattle and the chirp of crickets. Happy? Levi asked, a question he still posed regularly, wanting always to be sure. Zara nodded, then signed, completely. Levi pulled her closer, marveling as he often did at how perfectly she fit against him. Me too, he said, more than I ever thought possible. And as the stars multiplied in the vast Montana sky, Levi Morgan reflected on the strange and wonderful turns life could take. How a silent woman sitting beside him on a fence rail had changed everything. How love could be spoken in 1,000 ways that had nothing to do with words. How a family could build its own language of belonging. He had loved her before she spoke a word, just for sitting beside him on the fence rail. And all these years later, in the quiet moments between sunset and starlight, that love continued to grow, as vast and enduring as the Montana sky above them. Years passed, seasons changing like the pages of a book. Hope grew into a young woman with her mother's artistic talent and her father's steady determination. Will became a sturdy boy who could ride almost as soon as he could walk, with a natural affinity for the ranch that pleased Levi immensely. The dog that Hope had campaigned for, a clever border collie named Star, became an indispensable part of the family and the ranch operations. The Morgan Ranch prospered under Levi's management and Zara's careful accounting. They added more land, more cattle, more hands. The house expanded too, with a dedicated studio for Zara's artwork, which had become quite respected in the region. Her sketches and paintings of ranch life and Montana landscapes were sought after by collectors as far away as Denver and San Francisco. On Zara's 40th birthday, Levi surprised her with a trip to Yellowstone, recently designated as the nation's first national park. They left the children with Mrs. Johnson, now Mrs. Pearson, having finally married Jacob after years of courtship, and spent 2 glorious weeks exploring the natural wonders of the park, the geysers, hot springs, and majestic scenery that left even Zara, an artist accustomed to beauty, speechless with awe. They returned home renewed, full of stories and impressions to share with the children. Zara immediately set to work on a series of paintings based on their journey, while Levi began planning how they might take the whole family on such an adventure in the future. Life continued its steady rhythm, marked by the milestones of their children's growth. Hope's first dance in town, Will's first solo cattle drive with the men. The day Hope announced her intention to attend art school in Denver, following in her mother's creative footsteps. The evening, Will confided in Levi that he hoped to take over the ranch someday, ensuring the Morgan legacy would continue. Through it all, Levi and Zara remained each other's constant partners in the truest sense, communicating in the blend of speech, sign, and unspoken understanding that had become second nature to them both. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Levi took Zara back to the fence where they had first met. It was a mild spring evening, the air fragrant with wildflowers and new grass. The fence itself had been rebuilt several times over the years, but the location remained the same, the perfect vantage point for watching the sun set over the ranch that had been their life's work. 20 years, Levi marveled, helping Zara up onto the rail. His hair was streaked with silver now, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but he moved with the same strength and purpose he always had. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you sat down beside me here. Zara smiled, the expression lighting up her face just as it had when she was young. She had aged gracefully, her chestnut hair now threaded with gray, her green eyes as bright and expressive as ever. She signed, "Best decision I ever made." "For me too," Levi agreed. "I knew, even that first evening. There was something about you, something I couldn't put into words then and probably still can't now, but I knew you were going to change my life." Zara's eyes softened with emotion. She signed, "I felt it too, like coming home to a place I'd never been before." They sat in companionable silence as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The ranch spread out before them, the house with its welcoming lights, the barns and corrals, the pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. All of it built by their shared vision and hard work. "I brought you something," Levi said after a while, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "Happy anniversary, my love." Zara unwrapped it carefully to reveal a silver locket on a delicate chain. When she opened it, she found a tiny sketch inside, a perfect miniature rendering of the two of them sitting on the fence, watching the sunset. On the opposite side was engraved, "Forever begins on a fence rail." Tears welled in Zara's eyes as she looked up at Levi. She signed, "It's beautiful." "Perfect. Jacob's wife helped me find an artist in Helena who could work from one of your sketches," Levi explained, fastening the locket around Zara's neck. "I wanted something to commemorate where we began." Zara touched the locket reverently, then signed, "I have something for you too, but it's at the house." "We can go back," Levi offered. She shook her head and signed, "Not yet. Let's stay a little longer." So they remained on the fence as the sky darkened and stars began to appear, one by one, then in constellations, until the heavens were ablaze with light. It was a clear night, the moon a perfect crescent above the distant mountains. "Do you ever wonder," Levi asked softly, "what would have happened if you hadn't come to sit by me that evening? If you'd stayed in town with your aunt, never ventured out to this fence?" Zara considered the question, then signed, "I believe we would have found each other anyway." Different fence, different sunset perhaps, but the same ending. Levi smiled, touched by her certainty. "You think so?" She nodded emphatically, then signed, "Some loves are written in the stars, Levi Morgan. Ours is one of them." When they finally returned to the house, Hope and Will were waiting with a surprise of their own, a small celebration they'd arranged with the help of Mrs. Pearson. The dining room was decorated with wildflowers, the table set with the good china, and a cake sat in the center, its icing spelling out "Happy Anniversary." "We wanted to do something special," Hope explained, hugging her parents. At 18, she was the image of Zara, with the same green eyes and artistic hands. 20 years is a long time. "The best years," Levi said, his arm around Zara's waist, "and many more to come." After the celebration, when the children had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Zara led Levi to her studio. There, on an easel covered with a cloth, was her anniversary gift to him. When she removed the covering, Levi caught his breath. It was a painting of the fence at sunset, but not just any sunset. Somehow, Zara had captured that first evening the exact quality of the light, the way the shadows had fallen, even the expression on Levi's face as he turned to see her. It was a moment frozen in time, rendered with such love and skill that Levi felt himself transported back to that day. "Zara," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I don't have words," she smiled, understanding as always, and signed, "You don't need them, I can see it in your eyes." Levi pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed by the gift, and by the woman who had given him so much more than a painting, a lifetime of love expressed in 1,000 silent ways. As they stood together in the studio, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life and love, Levi thought again of that first sunset, of the strange and wonderful feeling that had come over him when a silent woman had chosen to sit beside him on a fence rail. He hadn't known then what that moment would lead to, the rich tapestry of experiences, challenges, joys, and sorrows that would make up their life together. But standing here now, holding Zara in his arms with the painting of their beginning before them, Levi knew with absolute certainty that he would choose it all again every moment, every struggle, every triumph, just to build this life with her. "I love you," he said simply, the words as true now as they had been the first time he'd spoken them. "More than I can ever say." Zara looked up at him, her green eyes reflecting the lamplight, and signed the words that never needed translation, "I love you too, forever." And in that moment, as in so many before it, Levi Morgan knew that the greatest gift of his life had come to him in silence, on a fence rail at sunset. The years continued to flow, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Hope went to art school in Denver as planned, but returned after 2 years, homesick for Montana and convinced she could develop her talent just as well at home. Will grew into a man his father was proud of, capable, kind, with a deep understanding of the land and its rhythms. The turn of the century brought technological advances that slowly reached even their remote corner of Montana. A telephone was installed in the house, though Zara naturally preferred written notes or sign language. An automobile appeared in town, causing quite a stir among the horses. The railroad expanded, making travel easier and bringing new opportunities for the ranch. Through it all, Levi and Zara remained constants for each other and for their children. Their love, which had begun so unexpectedly on a fence rail, deepened with each passing year, weathering life's inevitable storms and celebrating its many joys. When Hope was 25, she married the new schoolteacher, a thoughtful young man who had learned sign language to communicate with Zara, a gesture that had immediately endeared him to the entire family. Will, at 23, took over more of the daily ranch operations, allowing Levi to step back slightly, though he remained actively involved. On the evening of their 30th anniversary, Levi and Zara walked hand in hand to their special spot on the fence. They were older now, Levi's hair more silver than brown, Zara's face lined with the evidence of a life filled with smiles and laughter. But they climbed onto the fence with the same ease as always, settled side by side as they had that first evening. 30 years, Levi mused, taking Zara's hand in his. Who would have thought that first evening that we'd be sitting here 3 decades later? Zara signed with her free hand. I hoped we would. Levi smiled, still charmed by her optimism after all these years. You were more confident than I was then. I just knew I wanted to see you again. The rest was a beautiful surprise. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in familiar hues of gold and crimson. The ranch spread out before them, much changed from the struggling homestead Levi had inherited. Now it was a thriving operation with modern facilities and a reputation for quality that reached beyond Montana's borders. We've built something good here, Levi said, his gaze taking in the land that had been his life's work. Something that will last. Zara nodded, then signed, not just the ranch, the family, the love, those will last longer than any building or fence. You're right, as usual, Levi acknowledged with a smile. The most important things we've built can't be seen. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, they made their way back to the house, where their children and grandchildren waited to celebrate with them. Hope's twin boys, now 5 years old, ran to meet them, clamoring for stories and attention. Will's daughter, just 3, toddled behind, determined to keep up with her cousins. The house was filled with light and laughter, with food and music, with the rich tapestry of family life that Levi and Zara had created together. As they sat at the head of the long table, surrounded by the people they loved most in the world, Levi felt a profound sense of gratitude for the life they had built. Later that night, after the celebration had ended and the house had quieted, Levi and Zara sat together on the porch swing, wrapped in a quilt against the night chill. The moon was full, casting silver light over the land. Happy. Levi asked, the question he had posed countless times over their years together. Zara nodded, then signed, completely. You, more than I deserve, Levi said honestly. I've been the luckiest man alive since the day you sat down beside me. Zara shook her head at that and signed emphatically, not luck, love, choice. We chose each other every day for 30 years. Levi smiled, acknowledging the truth of her words. Their love had never been passive or accidental. It had been a daily choice, a continual turning toward each other through all of life's challenges and joys. And I'll keep choosing you, he promised, for as many days as we have left. Zara's eyes softened with emotion as she signed, as will I. Always. In the years that followed, they faced the inevitable changes that come with age. Levi's knees bothered him more, especially in cold weather. Zara's hands, always so expressive, developed a slight tremor. They moved more slowly, rested more often. But their love remained as strong as ever, perhaps even stronger for having weathered so many seasons together. When Will married and built a house of his own on the ranch property, Levi and Zara chose to remain in the home they had shared for most of their lives. It was filled with memories: Hope's height marks on the kitchen doorframe, Will's first pair of boots by the back door, the painting of their fence that still hung in a place of honor in the sitting room. Their grandchildren grew, filling the house with noise and energy whenever they visited. Levi taught them to ride and rope, to respect the land and its creatures. Zara taught them to draw and sign, to observe the world with an artist's eye and a compassionate heart. And always, no matter how busy life became, Levi and Zara made time for their sunset ritual at the fence. It was their private moment, a daily recommitment to the love that had begun in that exact spot so many years before. On the evening of their 50th anniversary, a remarkable milestone few couples reached, they made their way to the fence as usual. They moved more slowly now, Levi with a cane, Zara leaning on his arm. But their eyes were bright with the same love that had always been there, their hearts as connected as they had been on that first evening. The family had planned a celebration for later, but this moment was theirs alone, a private commemoration of where it all began. They sat on the fence, which had been specially reinforced by Will and their grandsons for the occasion, and watched as the sun began its familiar descent. 50 years, Levi said, his voice rougher now but still strong. Half a century of loving you, Zara Morgan, the best half-century any man could ask for. Zara's hands, though less steady than they once were, signed clearly, the best of my life too, every day. As the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Levi turned to look at his wife. Her face was lined now, her once chestnut hair completely silver, but her green eyes were as bright and expressive as they had been on that first evening. To Levi, she was as beautiful now as she had been then, perhaps more so, for her face now reflected a lifetime of love and shared experiences. You know, he said softly, I've been thinking about that first evening a lot lately. About how one small decision, your decision to sit beside a stranger on a fence rail, changed everything. Zara smiled and signed, not such a small decision. I had been watching you for days, gathering my courage. You never told me that, Levi said, surprised. She shrugged, a mischievous glint in her eye, and signed, a woman has to keep some secrets. Levi laughed, delighted as always by her ability to surprise him even after 50 years. Well, I'm glad you found your courage. Best thing that ever happened to me, you sitting down right here. Zara's expression softened as she signed, for me too. You saw me, Levi, really saw me from the very beginning, not as broken or incomplete, just as me. That's because you were the most complete person I'd ever met, Levi said simply. You still are. As the sun disappeared completely and the first stars emerged in the darkening sky, they sat together in the comfortable silence that had been the foundation of their relationship. No words were needed, not spoken, not signed, just the presence of each other as it had been from the beginning. Later, surrounded by their family, children, grandchildren, even a great-grandchild on the way, they celebrated their golden anniversary with food and music, with stories and laughter. The house was filled to bursting with love and life, a testament to what they had built together. As the celebration wound down, Hope raised a glass in toast to her parents. To 50 years of the greatest love story I've ever known, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You've shown us all what it means to truly love someone with or without words. Hear, hear, echoed Will, raising his glass high. To Mom and Dad, who taught us that the most important things in life are often communicated in silence. Levi looked at Zara across the table, his heart full to bursting. 50 years had passed since that first sunset on the fence rail, yet in some ways it felt like yesterday. The love that had begun so unexpectedly had grown into something more profound than he could have imagined, a love that had sustained them through good times and bad, that had created a family and a legacy, that had, quite simply, made life worth living. As the evening ended and their family departed, Levi and Zara stood on the porch, waving until the last carriage disappeared down the lane. Then, arm in arm, they made their way inside to the home they had shared for half a century. In their bedroom, Zara took out her book, not the same one she had used when they first met, of course, but a similar one, the latest in a long line of volumes filled with her thoughts and sketches and their shared history. She wrote something, then handed the book to Levi. "Thank you for loving me before I spoke a word," he read. "And for every moment since, I have been blessed beyond measure to share this life with you." Levi's eyes misted as he looked up from the page. "The blessing has been all mine, Zara Morgan. From that very first sunset to this one, and all the ones we have left." She took the book back and wrote one more line. "I loved you from the moment I sat beside you on that fence rail. I will love you beyond our last sunset." And as they held each other in the quiet of their room, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life, Levi Morgan knew that the silent woman who had captured his heart had given him more than he could have dreamed possible, a love that had spoken volumes without a single word, a love that would echo through generations to come. The fence rail where it all began would weather and eventually be replaced, as all physical things must be. But the love that had sparked there would endure in their children and grandchildren, in the stories told about them, in the legacy of a ranch built on hard work and shared dreams, and most of all in the quiet, profound understanding that had grown between two souls who had recognized each other at first sight. It was, after all, the greatest love story never spoken but understood perfectly, nonetheless.